Boardroom Bound, Episode 23. Headhunters, do you need one to secure a board role? With Russ Reynolds.
The way to get to the top and to be in a corporate board is to do an outstanding job at what you're doing.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give new and aspiring directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And in today's episode, we're live in the studio with Russ Reynolds. And Russ is the founder of two of the search industry's most prominent firms. He's considered one of the pioneers of today's executive search profession. And he spent over 50 years in the business, from founding Russell Reynolds Associates, and then after that, RSR Partners. He has been a speaker before the American Society of Corporate Secretaries, the Conference Board, the President's Dinner in Washington, D.C. He's been on the Today Show, the CBS Evening News. He was a trustee of Oppenheimer Mutual Funds, on the board of the Foreign Policy Association. He's also written a book, Heads, Business Lessons from an Executive Search Partner. So today's episode is a special deep dive into the executive search firm, what some of us call the headhunter industry. And we've got one of the pioneers who literally built the industry and two of the leading firms in that space. And he's going to give us behind the scenes look, some of the stories about how it evolved, and certainly how headhunters think and what they do. And at the end of the day, most of us are probably walking this episode thinking, these are the people I need to network with. I need to be on their radar. And Russ basically says, don't worry about that. You just need to be excellent in your job. If you do that really well, we will find you. And his point is that the headhunters are always networking. They're talking to the right people who will know the other right people that they should know to fill a specific role. They work for companies that are hiring for a board director, and that's what they're focused on, is finding exact people that they want. So while it's fine to network with them, that's not what you need to do. You need to be great in your job. But today he's going to reveal what that's like, how they go about their process, how we should think about it as individuals who want to be networking with them. So much information and a lot of fun to be live in the studio with Russ. So let's jump into the show. Russell Reynolds, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Thank you so much.
It's an honor to have you in the studio today. It's a pleasure. Most of ours are done remotely, so it's always great to have someone live with me here.
Well, I hope I'm alive.
Well, you have lived a long life in terms of the stories that we're going to talk about today. So if I just summarize that for our audience, 50 years in the executive search business. That's a lot of knowledge to share in just a half-hour podcast.
Actually, it's 53.
Okay. All right. So a lot more even, we'll have to just cram all of that in. I wonder if we could just start out and you could share with our audience. So most of our audience is either new board members or aspiring board members. And many of them will have heard at some point you're going to need to build relationships, executive search firms to help with your network and understanding how to break in. You have seen the whole industry evolve from, before we had the computers on the desks to what it is now using LinkedIn, et cetera. Can you give us a sense about where you started in your career, how you got to where you are now, and then we'll go from there?
Sure. I was born and raised in Greenwich, Connecticut, descended from farmers who worked hard 24/7.
And you told me it's, 11 generations in there?
Yeah. And was sent away to Phillips Exeter Academy. And it was the least expensive school, which...
Not anymore.
It sounded good. They didn't tell me that it was the most difficult. Anyway, I went there and was an average student, majored in socializing, and rode in the crew and was president of the choir and a few other things. Then I went to Yale, and I did some intercollegiate rowing. I was a president of the Yale Glee Club, a whiff and poof, secretary of my fraternity, and did well, but I was unfortunately not a gifted intellectual, more of a people person. Then I went in the Air Force ROTC, became a navigator, bombardier, in Strategic Air Command, and I was in 1955 and 6, I was equipped to drop a very large hydrogen bomb on a Russian city.
Wow.
And I don't think anyone has any idea what the power that we're talking about even then. And today, of course, it's infinitely more so. Anyway, after the Air Force, I returned to J.P. Morgan and Company, where I'd been hired when I got out of college, and I was a young banker. In the meantime, I had met my wife, Debbie, on a blind date in San Francisco. And having grown up in Greenwich with a lot of well-heeled, spoiled debutantes, I decided that Debbie was the real deal. So I persuaded her to get engaged, and we were actually married 7 months after we actually met in the Air Force. We spent a year in El Paso, Texas before I was released. So we went back to New York. We have 2 sons and a daughter. We moved back to Greenwich shortly after we returned to New York. And I enjoyed J.P. Morgan greatly. I felt that there was a spirit they were doing the right thing for the right reason, and that making money was not the objective. It was the result of doing good work. And their motto was do first-class business in a first-class way.
Right.
And in those days, J.P. Morgan was a very small elite bank.
It was before all the major mergers that there's the J.P. Morgan that I worked at a few years ago.
But anyway, I became very intrigued with the search business, and I had a couple of Yale friends who were in the search business. It was considered quite clubby at the time. All, I would say most, not all white males, but predominantly. And I ended up joining a small firm in New York at 330 Madison Avenue called William H. Clark Associates, and it was run by a couple of people I knew through my Yale experience. And I got there, and within a few weeks, I realized I was extremely good at the business and was going to be very successful at it. And after a couple of years, I went in to see the boss one day, and I said I wanted to hire a bright young assistant to carry my bags. And he said, well, if we do that for you, we have to do it for everybody else. And I said, well, everybody else isn't bringing in all the business I'm bringing in. And he was a great egalitarian, and I'm really not. And I'm a meritocracy person. I think if you're good, you ought to be allowed to thrive. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't put a governor on a triathlon runner. I'd let him go. So anyway, I wanted to hire a bright young assistant, and he said, if you need help, if you have extra work to do, some of the other partners can help you. And I said, Bill, the other partners are 20 years older than I am. They're not versed in Wall Street and finance as I am, and I don't think they're employable. In fact, I think they're rejects from the business world, and you are a saint to have given them a job. So when I said that, I had fairly red hair, so tended to be somewhat outspoken. I still am. And so when I blurted that out, I realized that maybe I'd gone too far and not only insulted him, but all the other people, and who I obviously didn't think much of. So I ended up leaving. And he said, oh, this whole firm will be yours someday. You're obviously the star. But I thanked him and just left. I went over to see my best friend and college roommate, O.B. Clifford, and we talked about my plight and decided to start a new search firm, Russ Reynolds Associates, which today has got 1,400 people and 47 offices around the world. And I just attended the 50th anniversary party, and one of many they have in New York. So, but in 1993, I retired from the firm, and I was really saddle sore from traveling all over Europe and Asia and the United States. I was tired of being the name on the door. I was tired of being the center of attention. I was tired of being on stage. So I decided to retire, and but I immediately started a small consulting business on corporate boards and governance. And I did that for about 8 or 9 years, and I decided that death was not imminent. So after I got out of a non-compete agreement, I decided to change the name of the firm from directorship to RSR Partners and to become a full-fledged search firm. So today we have about 8 offices, about 75 people, and we do top-level board search for corporate directors, CEOs, CFOs, private equity, heavy industry, marketing, sports management, healthcare, and technology. And today I am obviously much older, and but I'm the chairman, but not the CEO. And I have a 43-year-old CEO who has worked with me for 22 years. And he was one of those bright young people that I wanted to hire at Mr. Clark's firm. So today, we do a great deal of board recruiting, a great deal of board assessment, structuring, evaluation, and last year in 2018, 74% of the people we recruited for corporate boards were women or minorities. So we're very proud of that. The obviously the demand for diversity is huge, and we've tried to be ahead of the curve, not behind it. So we have some very good results. Getting CEOs of major public companies who are female is more difficult.
Very challenging.
Very, very limited supply, but we've done that too.
So when you think about what you've accomplished in terms of helping move the executive search industry across, that it's a very different place today. You talked about it's very clubby when it began, now more egalitarian, we'll use that term. So if people are listening to the audience thinking, great, I know I need to connect with a firm like RSR or others to build my brand and reputation, how does someone begin that? What's the best practice? So if you're sitting the other end of the phone in your office, you're going, I wish someone would do X. That would be the way to impress me and get on my radar.
The way to get to the top and to be in a corporate board is to do an outstanding job at what you're doing. And knowing a headhunter will be helpful, but it is, I would say, should not be somebody's corporate objective. Your objective should be to be, I have a grandson who went to work for IBM in the cloud computing training program for 2 years, and I told him his objective should be to go straight to the top of the company. And he said, well, they have 340,000 people. And I said, does that mean that you're not the best? And if you keep doing your job, it's funny how people self-destruct, or they get picked away. And if you're with a good company that is doing well, I think it is much smarter to stay there than to move, unless you have a good reason to. So the idea of wanting to be on a corporate board, the best recruiters, and I mean the people at the top of the industry, we find the people. They don't find us. Mm-hmm. So if we're asked to get a Hispanic female who is run a $8 billion division of an automobile manufacturing company, we find the person. They don't find us. And we don't represent individuals. We represent only client companies.
The companies. Yeah.
So we don't help people get jobs, and we don't help people go on boards. We don't make deals with people. We don't we don't have quid pro quos. Our job is to be clear-headed. It's like being the captain of a submarine. You're down there on the prowl, and then you put your periscope up and you find your target. So the word headhunter is quite apt because we hunt heads, and by heads I mean stars. And usually the people are not looking for a job or not dying to be on a board. They're usually happy because another thing we look for in people is, are you well adjusted? Are you happy? Do you wake up in the morning feeling good? Or are you angry? And happy people tend to be more successful. So one time I offered a job to a man who I had known in the past, and he said, I'd like to accept your offer, but there may be something you don't know about me, which I should tell you. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, actually, you know, I've never been married, and actually I have a male partner. And if that's a problem, we'll forget the whole thing. And I said to him, are you happy? Are you joyful? Are you filled with the sort of the Holy Spirit? I mean, do you feel good about life? He said, I feel great. And I said, great. So I got on a plane. I went out to Cleveland. I had dinner with the two people. And I asked the other guy, I said, are you committed to making good old Sam here successful? And he said, absolutely. So I was happy. So all three of us were happy. And the guy did very well. So what I'm saying is there are so many people with neuroses or various hang-ups, or, you know, we want people who have a big smile. That is my number one criterion.
Well, I think the idea of working with a lot of happy people is always fun, right? That I think that strikes us well in terms of the culture of an organization. And I'm just reflecting back for our audience on your idea that we've talked about this in the show lots of times. Be excellent at what you do is always job number one. The way I describe it, if my first job is being a box packer, I want to be the world's best box packer, and you'll get promoted from there. And so I guess the takeaway you're saying for people is you will build a brand and a reputation from that.
We will find you if you're good.
Because the people you're talking to will know about those people, and it just leads you like the breadcrumbs.
So we get on the phone or internet or whatever, and we say, we have an exciting assignment to find somebody with the following characteristics. And they email you back, and they'll say, well, my neighbor Sam here just, told me, people recommend people. And so it's definitely a network. Now, having said all that, it does no harm to know headhunters and to cooperate with them and try to help them complete assignments, but it's no guarantee that that person will necessarily be repaid.
I don't know if I would describe it as a pay it forward philosophy, but what I've always described to people is if a headhunter calls me about a certain role, that's their task, that's what they're trying to solve. And I might not be the right person, but my goal would be as a person who loves to network, well, let me think about who I know for you and how I can help you with that, just because I want to be helpful. It's not that I believe in karma and it's going to come back to me, but more of, I know if I'm solving a problem and someone's got an idea to help me, I would be appreciative of that as well. But I suppose naturally that helps. Headhunters, you guys have a database internally. We've probably spoken to Ted. Ted's been helpful for us, other things. And it might be you just call Ted again about other opportunities. Is that how it works? Tell us what it's like behind the black box.
Well, I think a lot of it, I think a good headhunter will personally know a lot of the leaders in the business world. So how do you do that? You go to places where they go. And I'm not advocating going to funerals of important people because I don't do that. But political events, dinners, Economic Club in New York, see and be seen. And pretty soon you know a winner when you see one. And you know another classic standard I use is he or she a giver or a taker. There are people who want to be recognized, paid highly, and thanked, and there are other people who don't think they deserve it. And the second category are people who probably often deserve it more. So
I suppose I would think about let's pretend there's a humility award and we've decided Bob will be the recipient. If Bob accepts the award, we probably have to take it back because it was a humility award. I think that's where we're going, right? So it's just be someone who does an excellent job, not necessarily looking for the publicity around it, and you will rise above is what you're saying. You'll be on the radars.
I definitely think some of the executive compensation packages are ridiculous, absurd, and I remember many years ago, the Coca-Cola company gave its then CEO, a fellow named Robert Gazzetta, a third grant of $100 million in stock options, or in stock, I'm not sure, but it was a great deal of money. And I remember thinking, and I'm being very honest, if I'd been Mr. Gazzetta, I would have turned it over to a charity. I mean, I just thought it was obscene. And we're talking 40 years ago when that was worth a lot more. I just thought it was obscene for him to accept it.
And it is shareholder money at the end of the day. So it's an interesting dilemma. We had Peter Hershend on the show before, who's a board of trustee here at Gordon College. And it's a privately held company, very large entertainment company. And their board received an award this year, Private Directors Association. And one of the things that came out in the press release was that their board actually got a pay cut from their own decision, thinking that we are getting too much of the credit as the compensation for the company doing well, and we don't think that's appropriate. You don't hear of that very often, right? So whether it's in the C-suite or the boards, for someone saying, too much, thank you.
One of the key things you look for in any company is how much money do they invest in research and development, which I think is the key to the future. And companies that are totally dominated by quarterly earnings results are usually dancing to the wrong tune. You want to think about long-term results. That doesn't mean you don't hire and fire people if they're not doing the right thing, but we're not running a church. But there's an attitude that is very significant.
I would agree on that. And let me pivot just for a second, because I can envision a question in my mind from some of our audience who are thinking, well, you're not talking about LinkedIn. Didn't LinkedIn change the world? Doesn't it change how headhunters think and find people? Should I be worried about my profile? Russ, you shared the message before of don't worry about touting your accomplishments too much. But in some ways, LinkedIn is almost a game about how you play that. What is your guidance for people in terms of that is a way that they present themselves? What are your thoughts on LinkedIn?
Well, in the first place, I have never been on LinkedIn.
Although I've got your profile, so I know it exists.
But about 10 days ago, one of my colleagues persuaded me that I should.
Perfect timing then. Okay.
So I think I have 473 followers, whereas my successor, Russell Reynolds, has 485,000 or something.
Well, that's something everybody thinks they should be connecting with that individual, right?
Yeah. And so the trouble with LinkedIn, from our point of view, is that a person writes their own script. And if you've been in Sing Sing, or if you're terminally ill, or if you've been divorced 5 times, or if you've been accused of bribing a college to get your kid in to Yale or USC, you probably don't put it on your LinkedIn.
Right.
So a good executive search professional figures it all out. Another huge obstacle today that we didn't have to deal with 50 years ago is the evil atomic cloud of government regulation. And now New York State has passed a law that you cannot ask somebody what they're getting paid because they think that it is used as a device to discriminate against women so that we want equal pay for both sexes. Right. And so not being able to ask somebody what they get paid is sort of a problem. But so my advice to any candidate for any job is to say as much about yourself as you possibly can without appearing to be too promotional, but to volunteer information and even including your date of birth. And you know, if you're a member of the ISIS party in the United States, you should say so because ultimately somebody will find out. In other words, be yourself and be proud of it. And I'm kidding, of course, about ISIS, but you know what I mean.
I do.
If you're a top lacrosse player or rock climber or a sailor or so forth, say so.
Right.
It's a great distinction.
And speaking of being honest about yourself and what you stand for and how it comes together, I'd love to just talk for a couple minutes about your book. And I know you brought some copies today, which I'm excited to get my own autograph to one of. But Heads, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes, Heads describes your journey. We've talked some of it about the professional journey today, but it's more than it. It's your whole life that comes together, right?
And until 2012. In other words, now it's 7 years old.
Right.
And Heads is it's sort of autobiographical, but there's a great deal in it about the search business and how the business works, how to write a resume, how to get noticed without being too obvious. And it talks about my upbringing, my education, my Morgan experience, and then getting into the search business. And it starts out with a chapter on my departure from Russell Reynolds Associates, which was something I wanted to do and initiated, but I didn't think it was handled very well by my successors. And but I think the book has some good practical information in it about, how to deal with search firms, how to use search firms, how to get the best out of them, and maybe even how to negotiate with them.
So the inside story there. So that's, I'm sure, what a lot of our audience would love to read. So we will make sure there's a link to that in our show notes. That'll be fantastic. And, Russ, we've talked about how the industry has changed so much over your time, and you've been about 25 years at Russell Reynolds Associates and around another 25 years at RSR Partners. Do you think there'll be a third firm that you'll start for another 25 years of success?
I have no idea. But I tell you, the fundamental trick of the business has not changed at all, and that's to be able to figure somebody out, size them up, and figure out what makes them tick. And having said all the platitudes I've said about values and character and so forth, it is particularly helpful to be extremely smart and to be successful. And, there's a lot of luck involved, but when I first went in the search business, I thought we were sort of harming companies by taking people out of them. And one day, one of my heroes in Greenwich, a wonderful man named Senator Prescott Bush, came up to me and he said, "Reynolds, I want to talk to you about your business." And I go, "Uh-oh, I'm in trouble." And he said, "The Bush family owe you a great sense of gratitude for getting a job for our nephew. You have done him and his family a great service." I'll never forget it. He was the father of George H.W. Bush and the grandfather of George W. But they were a Greenwich family. So once Senator Bush told me it was okay, I felt better.
That's good. Well, if the whole guide to the industry is about sizing people up, I'll give you my take on it, that I've loved the analysis you've given all of us today, the inside story and appreciation. So thank you for your sharing for the rest of us here, because that will help all of our audience as they go forward and work to become more boardroom bound. So thank you for being in the studio with us today.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Russ Reynolds, and it was a pleasure having him in the studio. This is someone who is literally one of the pioneers of the executive search profession, and he's built 2 of the leading companies. It was wonderful to hear his war stories and his clear, honest, open, transparent advice about how to go about being on their radar, what you need to do to land the board seats, and how they work and how they think. For me, it's one of those opportunities just to learn from someone who's been there and done that. It is filling those board roles that so many of us are actively seeking. Now remember, you can head over to podcast.gordon.edu where you can get links to all of the show notes that we talked about today. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you open up Stitcher or iTunes or Google Play or wherever you're listening to this and just take 30 seconds to leave an honest rating and review. This is the best way that we get out word about the show. I also encourage you to stay subscribed and tune in every week, because we're bringing you top quality content like we had today from a superstar in the industry, from Russ Reynolds. And thanks for joining me in this episode of the show. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be boardroom bound.